Well, it is a privilege to be here, hearing just those little bits of stories about your churches. Very encouraging. And privileged to be here. Some about my story, so you know where this is coming from. So I grew up in a 100-year-old church, so I like hearing about all these old churches. Okay, it's not as common in the U.S. Probably 125 years. 125-year-old church, actually. But later I will tell you how that 125-year-old church has made incredible progress in these things over the last 10 years. So say that to give everybody hope. Old things can change. They often change slower, it was a slow process turning that baby. But we've got it mostly turned now. That's the church I grew up in. It's not the church I'm part of now. But so that was in the middle part of America in Illinois. After I finished Bible school in Chicago, I moved to Eastern Europe. And so I lived in the Czech Republic starting in 1994. So Martin mentioned an organization called Josiah Venture. I helped start that in 1994. We moved in there, you guys know, coming out of communism. The churches had all the freedom now to do the things they hadn't been able to do the previous 50 years. So we didn't know where to begin. So it was a crazy time of experimentation and just trying to listen to God and trying to move. Basically trying new things to see what relationships look like in a former communist. You know, the Czech Republic's highly atheistic, one of the top 5 most atheistic countries in the world. So pretty much everybody we met with, talked to, played sports with, had literally zero understanding, zero exposure to the Bible, Christianity, Jesus. So we had a blank slate in that way. But I ended up then, after spending years in the Czech Republic, moved to Romania and lived in the western part of Romania for some years. Then moved from Romania to the Northwest in America, in the Seattle area, and helped lead a church called Soma, if you've heard of that, and helped start a network of churches just called the Soma Network. So I was there in Tacoma for 8 years. And then moved down to San Diego, California, where I live now, about 8 years ago. But the things I talk about today will not be American things. Whatever you think of America, we don't have to go there, okay? Because I've lived different places and traveled. Over the last 30 years, I've helped churches in about 30 different countries. So that's what I spend most of my time doing now with churches in South America and South Africa and Australia and Indonesia and Russia and Belarus, and still all those relationships in Eastern Europe, and then now the last probably 12 years, a lot around Western Europe, in Norway and Sweden and the Netherlands and Germany and Portugal and Spain. So the stories I tell, the examples I give will not be American. They will be from all these places. And some of them church plants, some of them replants, some of them revitalizations, just the whole spectrum. So again, I'm kind of the opposite of a one-size-fits-all guy, okay? Because you can't be. When you're working with so many churches and so many contacts, in so many denominations, in so many networks, you've got to learn to contextualize and customize. And so that's what I spend a lot of my time doing day to day, is coaching churches like yours, just to say what's next in Santiago, Chile, with your church there, or in Medellin, Colombia. So trying to help them think about their context and how to. Martin used a good word just now that I really want to emphasize today, and that's relational intentionality. If you don't remember anything else from what I say today, I want that one to stick. I believe that is one of the keys to maturing disciples. So the lack that we often see in our churches, I believe, is a lack of relational intentionality between Christians. Okay? But also our lack of conversion growth and our lack of influence with lost people, similarly, is a lack of relational intentionality. And so the relational intentionality piece just has massive implications, I believe, inside the church as well as outside the church. So we're going to be talking about, okay, how do we structure in such a way, how do we structure our churches and our lives in such a way to experience this kind of relational intentionality that is going to mature disciples as well as influence lost people. Okay? So I hope that's what you're expecting today. But we can go a lot of different directions also. Again, because I work with so many different churches, I'm used to going where the Spirit kind of leads the conversation. So at any time, please, if you disagree with something or want to push back on something, please do. I love pushback. I love different perspectives. Or if you have a question, what about this? Have you seen this? So please bring color to our conversation today from your stories and from your experiences, okay? It's just going to make all of this better for all of us. So, again, I've been in big churches and small churches. I was at Willow Creek, speaking of hypels. I was at Willow Creek for 2 years, so I know what it's like to be in a $200 million building. I don't know if you guys knew it cost that much, but $200 million. So we were actually talking about that idea. When you have a building that costs that much, you have to use it. So people are like, why did they land where they landed in certain things? And it's like, well, again, when you've got a building like that, you got to use it, or it's hard to justify spending the $200 million on it. You know what I mean? It's like, we're not going to do stuff in people's homes when we've got this. You know what I mean? Or we're not gonna do a bunch of decentralized programs out there when we've got this to use. And it's amazing. It is amazing. I don't know if you've seen it or been there. It's spectacular as buildings go. But I'm not anti-building, though, so we'll talk about that. I'm not anti-building. I'm not a pure house church guy. I believe we need both. I believe we need buildings. I believe we need house, yard, park-like relationships. We need both of those. I'm also not anti-program. I think there's a place for certain types of programs if those programs are leading to relational intentionality. Unfortunately, a lot of programs don't do that. A lot of programs just attract people, draw people. You have a bit of contact with those people. A lot of it's largely superficial without much depth, but I've also seen programs that aren't that do lead to deepening intentional relationship. So we can talk about both sides of that, program focus versus relationship focus. So all that to set us up for today. I've got a wife and 5 kids, so as you hear me talking about a few stories along the way of us using our house and our table and our refrigerator for mission. Missional communities that I've been leading over many years have always had a lot of kids around, okay? Anywhere, usually from at least 10 to 12, 13, 14 kids in the mix in addition to adults. So pretty chaotic. Pretty chaotic, but we call it the beautiful mess. It is messy, but it's a beautiful mess because in the middle of all the kids and all the noise and all of that, there's just, again, important relational things happening and a deepening of relationships both between the adults and their kids and the kids themselves as well. So yeah, you can ask me about any of that as we go. Martin sent you a few things. I don't know if you looked at those things, but I'm just going to comment on them briefly. One of the things he sent you was called a missional community training map. And that is kind of giving just an overview of certain principles, certain perspective on disciple making, mission, church planting, structure, all of that. So the first part of that is kind of answering the why, like why should we live this way? Why should we organize our churches this way? Why? And so hopefully that was helpful to read a few of those ideas and think about a few of those ideas. And then it moved into some of the structural realities of what's going to be necessary to accomplish those relational things. And again, the first part, with asking or answering the why question, again, I hope you landed on, again, it's all about relationship. Right at the center of that picture was, it was meant to communicate this Trinitarian relationship we have with Father, Son, and Spirit. So that's always got to be at the center, is that we are in relationship with a Trinitarian God. And we are inviting people to the same, into relationship with a Trinitarian God. But the story of God, the story of the Bible is just, it's one of relationship. There's obviously other aspects we could, highlight or talk about, but it's primarily relationship, right? And then we see Jesus come onto the scene as part of that story. And again, what was it all about? Primarily relationship. Relationship between him and the disciples, relationship then with him, the disciples, and basically a lost world that had not yet been introduced to the kingdom in that way. And so, but again, relationship. So that's hopefully what is motivating all of us as we think about our churches, as we think about the ministries we're part of, as we think about planting new churches. Again, we're saying it's not a project we're called to, it's not a program we're called to, it's not a series of meetings we're called to, it is relationship. And so how do we do it in such a way that relationship is the primary thing? Relationship is the primary thing. So hopefully, as I explain some of these other things that we're going to get into, that's going to be highlighted. I sent you a second thing, which just gave some really practical details. I hope today is going to be practical for you, because there's a lot of theory out there. And again, I work with hundreds of churches in 30 different countries. So I know, again, from South America and Africa, actually many of the questions that leaders are struggling with, as you might be struggling with, are universal. You'd be surprised at how similar they are as you go into different parts of the world. Different sized cities, different economic realities, different ethnic realities, similar challenges. Not surprising, because we're human, made in the image of God, okay? But again, because it's relationship. So it shouldn't be surprising that the guys in Peru are struggling with similar things, because again, the challenge is always relationship. How do we foster healthy relationship that matures disciples and influences lost people? So universally true, I've found. So you may be thinking like, man, how do you work with such diversity in so many different places? It's actually quite similar. Quite similar country to country, city to city, people group to people group, I've found. Different ethnicities, different economic realities. So I sent you that second thing, which had some specifics, and you can ask about some of that stuff later. I know you're into this thing in your home and you're baptizing this person in your backyard, but what's next? You've got one of those. How are you going to multiply to two of those? That's a big question. How do you multiply these smaller communities? Okay? Because it's easier to start one. It's easier to start one of those than to get to two of those. Multiplication is actually a little bit tricky, and we can talk about why that is talk about why that is and how that is, okay? And then the third thing we sent you late, I think yesterday, I really wanted to, I know there's got to be a lot of questions from you about, okay, we understand you're talking about these smaller communities, whatever you want to call it, a missional community, a gospel community, I don't care what you call it a life group, call it a home group, doesn't matter what you call it, but we're going to talk specifically about certain functions that I believe need to happen within that structure. Does that make sense? But that structure of, say, 8 to 14 people, okay, is one structural reality. But again, it's not just about that. The thing I sent you is proposing that we actually need other structures that accomplish other things that can't. I don't believe you can accomplish everything you need to in a house church. I don't believe they call it a house church. I actually don't believe it's a church biblically, theologically, and we won't get into that argument, but that's just my conviction. I believe a house group or a missional community is a part of or needs to be part of a fuller church reality. So maybe you're thinking now, like, how would you define a church then? I'll just put out there, I believe it's a network of missional communities or a network of house churches. So I think when you get to the 4 or 5 community size and capacity, I think now we're talking New Testament church that has the ability, the capacity to, to have a few elders, to have a few deacons, to have good representation of Ephesians 4 and the different spiritual gifts. I don't think you can find that in a singular house church, usually, personally, okay? So that document that I sent you yesterday was called 3 Essential Structures, and I'd actually love to hear a bit about what you think about that. So it was basically just saying we do need a bigger relational reality. Again, remember, our big theme is relationship. So Sunday gathering or being at the church on a Sunday morning, be careful, again, it's not about the building. It's not about the meeting. It's about relationship. So we have to be asking ourselves, what is being accomplished through that larger gathering? Whether that's, some of you said 30 people, 50 people, 100 people, doesn't matter what the number is. I think we need to be asking the question, what relationally is being experienced there? What's relationally being experienced between those people and God as Father, Son, and Spirit? And then what's being experienced between each other? And you're going to hear me say this probably 100 times today. Okay? One of our primary identities that we see in, again, the story of God, the Bible, is our identity as family. And I hope if you're not emphasizing that in your churches, that you will begin to, as part of what you encourage people with and call people to, is this idea that the church is primarily family. True in the Old Testament that God had Israel as his chosen ones, as his family, okay? But it's an Old Testament thing, it's a New Testament thing, it's a church thing. It's part of our identity that we need to really, I believe, lead with as church leaders, because if people get rooted in this identity as the church, it will change how they relate, right? If you're not thinking like family, then church is more like an organization. Yeah, I'm part of that church. And it's like coming to this golf club, right? Like, you know the guys that are golfing here regularly, like you know the people at church. They're part of the golf club. Well, they're part of my church, you know? And so you've got kind of these superficial, friendly relationships with these people in your church, but it's very different than family. Like, healthy family, will die for each other, right? Like the level of commitment, the level of compassion, the level of sacrifice, the level of hospitality and generosity and all those things, all the one another's that we hear Paul talk about, all of those things are only going to truly be experienced if you're thinking about each other like family, rather than going to the golf club. Like you're not going to relate in that way to your golf buddies. But unfortunately, that's how a lot of people do experience church. Kind of like their golf buddies. It's like, yeah, those are my church buddies. You know what I mean? And so it's lacking, when it's lacking that identity and that calling, that conviction that no, we're family. And so with family, there's responsibility. That's another problem I'm sure you feel in your churches, right? Why are people not more committed? I've heard that about, I don't know how many thousands of times. Why are they not more committed? Why do they not feel more responsibility for our church? They don't feel that commitment. They don't feel that responsibility because they don't see it as family. They don't feel, they don't experience the spiritual dynamic there, and this again, the responsibility that comes with it, that comes with family. So actually, I'm going to give you something else here and then get a few comments or questions. So we were talking over dinner about this and trying to figure out, like, I know there's a lot of diversity here. Churches at different stages and different sizes and different perspectives and different theologies and all that, which I love. I love that you're in the same room together, so that's cool. That's beautiful. But trying to figure out what would be most helpful to talk about today, this is one of the things I was like, if we can really get this identity piece established, I think it's going to be helpful. So let me lay this out for us. And again, this was on that first document that I sent you, if you remember this triangle. Again, I believe biblically, theologically, we could spend a lot of hours talking about where this comes from, okay? But I think you'll agree, you're smart people, you're super experienced, you've been in ministry, you've been in church for a lot of years, so there will be no surprises here, really. But these primary identities are a theological, biblical reality, but man, do they have practical implications. Lots of practical implications. So if you can root, if you can establish, if you can even disciple your people in light of these identities, it will, I believe, bring significant fruit in your churches. So it's basically, I don't know if you can read that, those scribbles, but our primary identity, obviously, is disciples. What's the essence of what it meant to be a disciple, right? It meant to be a student or a learner. You were coming under a rabbi to be a learner, right? So when Jesus called the disciples, he was calling them to be students, learners. Well, unfortunately, again, it's a lost thing in so many churches, where the average person in your churches doesn't feel that, believe that about themselves. Like, I'm here to grow and learn and be a student of Jesus, to learn to walk in the ways of Jesus. Like, that's who I am. That's part. So when I wake up in the morning, that's true of me. So what's God have for me to learn today? Every day there's learning that needs to happen. There's learning to walk in the ways of Jesus, okay? So this primary identity of disciple, again, called learner or student. But then how does that get worked out in daily life? As I go to work today, as I go to school today, as I go to the golf club today, as I go to the coffee shop today, as I go to the market today, as I walk the dog today, how does that work out? I think much of it works out in these other three identities, as I already described, as family with whatever church body or church reality that we're part of. We're in this life together with a group of people trying to learn together to live in these ways every day, everywhere we go, not as a program, not as a project, but as a lifestyle. So those other identities, servant and missionary, again, so often in churches have, right, they even call it a service project. And you're invited to participate in a service project once a quarter or once whatever rhythm, right? Service project. Are service projects bad? No, don't hear that. But very limited, because it's our identity. We're meant to think like a servant, pray like a servant, give like a servant, act like a servant all the time. Not just when it's organized as a service project, but all the time. So even if I was going to go golfing out here today, okay, with some friends, it's like, what does it look like for me to live out my servant identity with my golf buddies? It's a serious question. Or I'm going to work today as an accountant or a nurse or a mechanic or a carpenter. What's it look like for me to go to my workplace today in light of my identity to be a servant there? You think that wouldn't change some workplaces? If Christians were going there every day in light of their identity as a servant, and they're thinking, they're thoughtful about their coworkers, they're thoughtful about their boss, they're not just there to earn a living, get some work done, make some widgets, okay? But they're actually there in light of this identity to be a servant, and then not only to be a servant, but to be a missionary. Again, the church over the last decades have kind of majored in missions projects. It's actually, I don't like the term, okay? Mission project. Because missionary is something that's true of all of us all the time. And that's just one expression of it when we go to another country. She was talking about going to Bulgaria with me before we started. You guys, go to different countries. But when Martin goes out and walks his dog this afternoon, he's going to see some neighbors there walking their dogs. Okay, I did it with him yesterday, actually, so I know this isn't just theory, okay? When he goes out and walks his dog this afternoon, he's going to have opportunities to live out that identity. Even walking his dog, even in his neighborhood, in that little dog area, because there's other neighbors there walking their dogs, okay? But what a difference if Martin begins to walk the dog in light of this, thinking about, okay, who is it out there that God wants me to say hello to, take an interest in, build a little trust with, take a genuine interest in their dog, but then not just their dog, their family, and then not just their family, but their life. So as he goes to walk the dog, it should turn into more relationship where Martin is living out his identity as a missionary in the neighborhood as he walks the dog. You see how this is going to change everything in your churches? If an increasing number of people in your churches begin to go to work differently, begin to walk the dog differently, begin to go to the park differently, everywhere they go, they're doing it in light of, okay, what's it look like for me to work out my servant identity here? I'm at the park, the kids are playing, that mom over there, she looks frazzled. She looks tired, she looks discouraged, her kids are screaming. What would it look like for me or my wife or us at the park to live out this servant identity, this missionary identity towards that mom at the park who needs some help? She needs some help, she needs some encouragement. And that today is part of what God desires for us as we go to the park. You go to work, some of your coworkers, your boss, same thing. What do they need? They need some encouragement and they need some hope. They need somebody to take a genuine interest in their life. Okay? So it's interesting, this idea of missionary. I was a foreign missionary, a sent missionary, obviously to Eastern Europe for all those years. But unfortunately, when the church created that special class of people, it basically let all the other Christians kind of off the hook. And we chuckle, but actually it's quite sad because it's the reality of what we see in our churches today. It's like this special class of people that are the missionaries, or this special class of people even that are the disciple makers, the disciplers. Oh, that's a special class of Christian. That's not me. I'm just going to show up to church. I'm going to be a good church goer. I'm going to consume a bit of church activity, and then I'm going to go home to my life. But that's not my life. That's the paid guy's life or the elder's life. That's for those people. That's not for me. That's the big thing that has to change in your churches.
So is that the bit that Paul talks about, do the work of an evangelist sort of thing, even if they don't feel like they're an evangelist?
Yes. Yeah. So I'm all about Ephesians 4. Love how Paul talks about it there, but a couple of things I want to say about how I understand Ephesians 4. One is that, I believe my wife is an evangelist, gifted in that way. I was telling Martin yesterday, she's got, wherever she goes, where'd she go 2 days ago? So I've got 2 sons and 3 daughters, and all 3 of my daughters play club soccer. Soccer's big for girls in America. And so I actually coach soccer, and I've coached my girls some. But so my wife goes to a soccer practice 2 days ago, just takes my daughter, harmless, normal training for our 13-year-old daughter. But because my wife goes there as a servant missionary, of course, she connects with one of the non-Christian moms. And the non-Christian mom asks her, because she's loved her well previously, she says, hey, you want to go for a walk with me because we got to kill some time during this training. And so she goes for a walk with this non-Christian mom of one of the girls. All the families, all the girls on my daughter's team are non-Christians. Okay, so it's part of our mission field. We love soccer, but we wouldn't play soccer actually if it was just about the soccer, as much as we love soccer, because we will also see it as mission field, so many relational opportunities there. But my wife goes there and gets into this incredible conversation about spiritual things with this mom walking around, the soccer pitch, waiting for our girls to finish. So that's, I think, for her to get into the kind of conversation she does and have those kind of opportunities, I believe that's the gift of an evangelist. But I like what you said. I believe we're all called to the work of an evangelist because, again, it's rooted in our identity. So I actually like this word better. I like that word better than evangelist or evangelism. Yeah, for some different reasons. So you can wrestle through that. Okay, evangelist is a good word. Obviously, it's a biblical word. But I think missionary is just so. If again we can root people in that understanding to say again, you're taking your kids to a school event. You go there as a missionary. What's that look like to think like a missionary at the school event? Pray like a missionary at the school event. Talk with people at the event like a missionary. Does that make sense?
So is it a bit less in your face?
Say that again?
Is that a little bit less in people's faces?
Good. Yep. We say, what are you thinking as you say that?
So people often think an evangelist is sort of very preachy. So I got to go preach to people. Whereas if you're a missionary, you go there and you just be there as a follower of Christ. And you love people, and then you find the natural opportunities to share your faith.
Okay.
It's a little bit softer, but
good.
A lot more effective.
Good. A little softer. So I was going to get to this at the end of the day, and I'll probably because this is a big point. Again, so the idea I want to talk about is how do we basically have intentional conversations with people at the park, at the soccer pitch, at the market. Again, my wife will be in the checkout line, no kidding. We've got one non-Christian woman connected with our missional community now. She just met in the checkout line. It's like, how's that possible? It's like, how did she do that? So she was in the checkout line. This woman had a little son about the same age as our son. She just took a genuine interest in this woman. This woman's actually from Peru, another country. And so it was just an interesting dynamic for my wife to take that initiative, But she did it because of this. Does that make sense? She's actually going to shop, not just to get the food. She's got her missionary identity locked in, saying, is there somebody here that's hurting today or, needing something today that you want me to touch in some way or say hi to or, but always having that going on. So she's checking out with this mom, sees that she's got a son about our son's age, says, oh, how old's your son? What neighborhood school are you guys in? Just a few super normal questions. And after about 3 minutes, I think this woman was shocked by how friendly my wife was and how genuine she was. But the woman, I think, actually asked or offered and said, man, could we get our boys together to play for a play date at the park? So basically, this woman was lonely. She was lonely for another mom, and she knew that her son was lonely for a good friend. And so that simple act of servant interest at the store turned into this opportunity. So a week later, they set up a time at the park. They hang out at the park for an hour and a half. She gets to know a bunch about her story, how she got to America from Peru, a bunch of details. And at the end of that time, she's like, yeah, and we've got this community of people. We live a lot of life together. We eat a lot of meals together, throw parties together. Would you want to come, experience that? With your son, with your husband? She was like, oh, for sure. She's, had this amazing conversation with my wife at the park, which then was easy to invite her into the missional community because we do a lot of, again, very relational things. Okay? So it's a lot of meals, as Jesus did, and it's a lot of parties, as Jesus did. Sounds crazy, doesn't it? That our primary strategy, relational strategy, is meals and parties. But it really is. It's like, do you guys ever study the Bible or do anything serious? Okay, we do that too, okay? We've got space for that, we've got time for that. But a lot of it, because it is relationally motivated, it's like, where are relationships built best? We think it usually happens around the table, okay, with some kind of food involved. So we major in meals and parties. And we like that Jesus was known as a glutton and a drunkard also. Okay? Jesus was known as a glutton and a drunkard because he was eating so often with lost people. Isn't it interesting that the Pharisees hated it? They hated that Jesus not only was spending that time with tax collectors and sinners, but how he was doing it, because around the table represented, what did it represent?
Fellowship.
Deep relationship. Not just we're getting a burger together and, it's like if you were around a table with somebody, if you were in that kind of personal space with people, it represented like a level of care, a level of depth that the Pharisees just thought was complete heresy. It's like not only do you not talk with those people, but you're actually around the table with them over a meal with them. And Jesus was like, exactly, that's why I've come. I've come for those people, and I've come to relate with those people in that way. around the table. That's how deep I want to be in relationship with the lost sheep, lost coins, lost sons, the lost ones. Okay, I'm going to be around the table with them. Okay, so anyway, I don't know how I got off on that exactly, but bring it back here. What do you guys think about this? Are you seeing how important this is to root every Christ follower in your churches in their identity, and then how that has the potential to change how they live daily life? Comment.